Hi, everybody. Welcome back. We are reading chapter 15 now of The Black Cauldron. Before we get into it, if you remember when we left off, I know it's been a long weekend for most of you if you're just watching this and you just finished last week. They were trying to strike a bargain with Ordu, Orwen, and Orgosh. They were trying to get the cauldron, bargain with them, and the witches were giving them their chance to get the cauldron. And they'd pretty much bargained everything, or, they'd offered everything that they had, except for one thing. Taryn's friends all kind of protected him and didn't let him bargain the most valuable thing that perhaps they have right now. So let's see what happens in this next chapter. By the way, you'll notice Lloyd Alexander calls these three women either witches or enchantresses or crones or hags. They're disguised as old women, and we know that actually they can kind of change whether they're beautiful or whether they're ugly. So chapter 15 is called The Black Kraken. "Farewell, my owlets," Ordu said, turning toward the cottage. "Unfortunate that you couldn't strike a bargain with us. But that, too, is the way of things. Flutter home to your nest now and give all of our love to dear little Dalbin." "Wait!" Taryn called, and strode after her. Elenwe, realizing Taryn's intent, cried out in protest and caught his arm, and gently Taryn put her aside. Ordu stopped and looked back at him. There's one more thing," Taryn said in a low voice. He stiffened and took a deep breath. "The brooch I wear. It's a gift from Adon, son of Taliesin." "Brooch?" said Ordu, eyeing him curiously. "A brooch, indeed. Yes, that might be more interesting. Just the thing, perhaps. You should have mentioned it sooner." Taryn lifted his head, and his eyes met Ordu's. And for that instant, it seemed like they were very much alone. He raised a hand slowly to his throat, and he felt the power of the brooch working within him. "You've been toying with us, Ordu," he whispered. "You saw that I wore Adon's clasp from the moment we came here. You knew it for what it was." "Does that really matter?" Ordu replied. "It's still your choice, whether you'll bargain with it or not. Yes, we know the brooch well. Menwe, son of Teligad, first of the bards, fashioned it a long time ago." "You could have killed us," Taryn murmured, "and just taken the clasp." Ordu smiled sadly. "You do not understand, poor chicken. Like knowledge, truth, and love themselves, the clasp must be given willingly, or its powers are broken. And it is indeed filled with power. This, too, you must understand by now. For Menwe the Bard cast a mighty spell on it. He filled it with dreams, wisdom, and vision. With such a clasp, a duckling could win so much glory, so much honor. I mean, who can tell? He might rival all the heroes of Prydain, even Prince Gwydion of Dawn." "Think carefully, duckling," Ordu said. "Once given up, it shall not come to you again. Will you exchange the brooch for an evil cauldron that you intend only to destroy?" As Taryn held the brooch, he recalled with bitter clarity the joys of sight and scent, of dewdrops on a spider web, his rescue of his companions from the rockfall, Gurgi praising his wisdom, and the admiring eyes of Elenwe, and Adon, who entrusted the brooch to him in the first place. Once more came to him the pride and strength of knowledge. At his feet, the ugly cauldron seemed to mock him. Taryn nodded, barely able to speak. "Yes," he said heavily. "This shall be my bargain." Slowly he undid the clasp at his throat, and he dropped the bit of iron into Ordu's outstretched hand. It was as though a light flickered in his heart and died, and he nearly cried out from the anguish of it. "Well done, my chicken," Ordu cried. "The brooch for the Kraken." About him his companions stood in silence and dismay. Taryn's hand clenched. "The Kraken is ours," he said, looking Ordu fully in the face. "Is this not so? It's ours to do with as we please." Why, of course, dear fledgling, said Ordu. We never break a bargain. It's yours entirely, no question about it. In your stables, Terran said, I saw hammers and iron bars. Will you grant us the use of them? Or, he added bitterly, must we pay another price? Oh, use them by all means, replied Ordu. We can count that as part of the bargain, for you're a bold chicken, we must admit. Terran led the companions to the stables, and there he paused. I understand what each of you were trying to do for me, he said quietly, taking each of their hands in turn. Each of you would have given up the things you treasured the most for my sake. I'm glad Ordu didn't take your heart, Fluter, he added. I know how unhappy you'd be without your music, much more than I without my brooch. And Gurgi, you should have never tried to sacrifice your food wallet on my account. And Elenwe, your ring and bauble are much too useful and beautiful to exchange for an ugly kraken. All of these things, Terran said, are doubly precious now. And so are all of you, the best of true comrades. So he's thanking his friends for what they tried to do for him. With that, he seized a heavy hammer that was leaning against a wall. Come now, friends, we have a task to finish. Armed with iron bars and sledgehammers, the companions quickly hurried back to the cottage, while the enchantresses looked on curiously. Terran raised his hammer. With all of his strength, he brought it down on the kraken. The hammer rebounded. The cauldron rang like a deep bell of doom, but it remained undented. With a cry of anger, Terran struck again. The bard and Elenwe added their fury of blows, while Gurgi belabored the cauldron with an iron bar. Despite all their efforts, the cauldron showed not the slightest bit of damage. Drenched and exhausted, Terran leaned against his hammer and wiped his streaming face. You should have told us, my goslings, what you intended, Ordu called. You can't do that to the kraken, you know. The cauldron belongs to us, retorted Elenwe. Terran has paid more than enough. It's our business if we want to smash it. Well, naturally, replied Ordu. And you're quite welcome to keep on hammering and kicking it from now until the birds start nesting again. But, my silly goslings, you'll never destroy the kraken that way. Oh, goodness no, you're going about it all wrong. Gurgi, about to crawl inside the kraken and attack it from within, stopped to listen while Ordu continued. Since the kraken is yours, she added, you're entitled to know how to dispose of it. There's only one way, though very simple and neat it is. Well, then tell us, Terran cried, so we can put an end to this evil thing. A living person must climb into it, Ordu said. When he does, the kraken will shatter. But, she added, there's only one disagreeable thing about that. The poor duckling who climbs in will never climb out again alive. With a yelp of terror, Gurgi sprang from the cauldron and scuttled a safe distance away, where he furiously brandished his iron bar and shook his fist at the cauldron. Yes, said Ordu, with a smile, that's the way of it. The kraken only cost you a brooch, but it will cost you a life to destroy it. Not only that, but whoever gives up his life to the kraken must give it up willingly, knowing full well what he does. So Gurgi didn't destroy the cauldron when he climbed inside of it because he didn't know that that's how to destroy it. So that person that goes in it has to know they're going to give their life and go in it knowing they have to give their life in exchange to destroy the cauldron. Now, my chickens, she went on, we must really say farewell. Orgosh is dreadfully sleepy. You had us up so early this morning, you know. Farewell, farewell. She waved a hand, and with the other enchantresses, she turned to enter the cottage. Stop, Terran shouted. Tell us, is there no other way? He ran to the doorway. Ordu's head popped out for an instant. None whatsoever, my chicken, she said, and for the first time there was a hint of pity in her voice. The door snapped shut in Terran's face. He pounded on the door in vain, and no further reply came from the enchantresses. And even the windows suddenly darkened with an impenetrable fog. Wow. When Ordu and their friends say farewell, remarked the bard. They mean it. I doubt we'll ever see them again. He brightened. And that's the most cheerful piece of news I've had this morning. Taryn wearily dropped the hammer to the ground. Surely there must be something else we can do. We can't destroy the Kraken, but we dare not part with it. Let's hide it, suggested Fluter. Bury it, I should say, and as soon as possible. You can be quite certain we won't find anybody eager to jump in that thing and break it for us. Taryn shook his head. No, we can't hide it. Sooner or later, Arwen would find it, and then all of our efforts would be useless. Dalbin will know what to do, he went on. Dalbin alone has the wisdom to deal with the cauldron. Gwydion himself planned to bring the cauldron to Caer Dalbin. Now that must be our task. Fluter nodded. I suppose that's the only safe thing to do, but it's a cumbersome beast. I don't see how the four of us lugging it along some of those mountain trails is going to go. In front of the silent cottage, the companions led out Luger and Melonlass, and they lashed the cauldron between the two steeds. So remember, Melonlass is one horse, Luger is the other horse, and they're putting some vines between the two horses and putting the cauldron between the two. Gurgi and Elenwy guided with heavy-laden horses, while Taryn and the bard walked, one in front and one behind, to steady the Kraken. So Taryn's in front, Fluter's behind. They're steadying the cauldron as it's slung between the two horses. And Elenwy and Gurgi are leading the horses. Though eager to be gone from Ordu's cottage, Taryn didn't dare venture across the marshes of Morva again. Instead, he determined the companions would travel some distance from the edges of the swamp, keeping to the solid ground and following a path, half circling the bog till they reached the moors. It's a longer way to go, Taryn said, but the marshes are much too treacherous. Last time, Adon's brooch guided me through. Now, he said with a sigh, I'm afraid I'd lead us to the same fate as the huntsman. So remember last time he had the brooch to guide him through the island so he wouldn't sink into the marsh. And now he's like, without this brooch, we're going to have to go around. That's a rather good idea, the bard cried. I mean, not for us, he added quickly, but, for the Kraken. Why don't we sink this beastly pot in quicksand? No, thank you, said Elenwy. By the time we've found quicksand, we'd be sinking right along with the Kraken. If you're tired, we can change off and you can lead Melonlass for a while. No, not at all, grunted Fluter. It's not as heavy as all that. In fact, I find the exercise quite bracing, quite invigorating. A flam never flags. At this, a harpstring broke, but the bard gave it no heed, busy as he was holding his side of the swaying cauldron. Taryn trudged in silence, speaking only to call out directions to Gurgi and Elenwy. They continued for with few moments of rest throughout the day. Nevertheless, by sunset, Taryn realized they had covered only a little distance. They'd barely reached the broad moorlands. He was also aware, too, of his own fatigue, as heavy as the Kraken itself. A weariness he'd never noticed while he was wearing Adon's brooch. Remember, they're so tired, they've been up all night, now they're walking all day. They camped on an open heath, cold and barren, shrouded by drifting mist from the marshes of Morva. There they unroped the Kraken from the tired horses, and Gurgi brought out the food from his wallet. After the meal, Fluter's spirits revived a bit. Although shivering from chill and dampness, the bard put his harp to his shoulder, and he attempted to cheer the companions with a merry song. Taryn, usually eager to listen to the bard's music, sat apart, gloomily watching the cauldron. After a time, Elenwy drew near, and she put her hand on Taryn's shoulder. I realize it's no consolation to you, she said. But if you look at it in one way, you didn't give up a thing to the enchantresses. I mean, not really. You did exchange the clasp and everything that went along with it, but don't you see? All those things came from the clasp itself. They weren't things that were inside of you. I think, she added, it would have been much worse giving up a summer day. That's part of you, I mean. I know I wouldn't want to give up a single one of mine, or even a winter day for that matter. So when you come right down to it, Taryn, Ordu didn't take anything from you. Why, You're still yourself, and you can't deny that. Yes, Taryn answered. I'm still only an assistant pig keeper. I should have known that anything else was too good to last. Well, that may be true, said Ellen. But as far as being an assistant pig keeper is concerned, I think you're a perfectly marvelous one. Believe me, there's no question in my mind. You're the best assistant pig keeper in all of Verdane. I mean, how many others there are, I don't know, but that's beside the point. And I doubt a single one of them would have done what you did today. I couldn't have done otherwise, Taryn said. Not if we were going to gain the Cauldron. Ordu said they were interested in the way that things are, he went on. I believe now they're concerned with the way that things are, things as they must be. You know, Adon knew there was a destiny laid on him, Taryn continued, turning to Elenwy, his face growing firmer. Adon didn't turn away from it, and it cost him his life. Well, very well, he declared. If there's a destiny laid on me, I shall face it. I just hope that I can face it as well as Adon did his. You know, don't forget, added Elenwy, no matter what else happens, you won the Cauldron for Gwydion and Dalbin and all of us. That's one thing nobody can take away from you. Why, for that alone, you have every reason to be proud. Taryn nodded. Yes, this much I've done. He said no more, and Elenwy quietly left him there. For long after the others had gone to sleep, Taryn sat staring at the Kraken. He thought carefully over all that Elenwy had told him. His despair lightened a little, and a sense of pride stirred inside of him. Soon the Cauldron would be in Gwydion's hands, and their long task would be ended. This much I've done, Taryn repeated to himself, and a new strength budded in his heart. Nevertheless, as the wind moaned across the heath and the Kraken loomed before him like an iron shadow, he thought once more again of that brooch, and he buried his hands in his face in his hands, and he wept. That's the end of this chapter. It had to be so hard for him to give that up because he felt finally like he had some special things about him, some special abilities. So I know that was a big sacrifice for him. And Elenwy is trying to cheer him up, obviously. Chapter 16 we'll read soon. It's called The River. So thanks for tuning in, everybody. See you soon.